Welcome to the Fieldhouse Strength Podcast. Fieldhouse Strength Podcast. If it's strength and conditioning, powerlifting, athlete performance, general fitness, and anything in between, we're talking about it. Your hosts are pros who've done it all and here to share that knowledge with you. This is the Fieldhouse Strength Podcast. And here are your hosts, Shaun Jones and Jonathan Byrd.
Welcome to the first Fieldhouse Strength Podcast with Shaun Jones and Jonathan Byrd. To give you a little background, I have been involved in strength and conditioning for over 20 years, a former college football coach and current assistant high school coach under Coach Byrd here. As a gym owner, I've worked with athletes from high school to college to a couple of professional athletes, and I do a lot of corrective exercise with people with specific issues. And Byrd, I'm going to let you tell people about yourself because you got too many things for me to remember.
Former college athlete, former professional football player, professional powerlifting total in multiple weight classes, one-time top 20 all-time powerlifting total, helped coach multiple world records, and a now high school football coach.
All right, so what we do on this podcast is we just find different things that have to do with strength and conditioning, performance enhancement, and we will talk about that mostly or anything that comes to mind. Sometimes it has nothing to do with it. But one thing we're going to look at today is there was a YouTube video I came across a couple of years ago, a Facebook friend of mine video, and the name of it is Bodybuilder versus Football Player 315-pound bench press challenge. And so what we're going to do is we'll put a link below this so you can take a look at it yourself. And, you know, definitely these guys are strong, and I've been the strongest person at a dinner party most everywhere I go, and Byrd's normally the strongest animal at the zoo when he goes. So basically you've got a bodybuilder that, what do you say, he's about 5'7"?
Yeah, I mean, he's clearly a professional level bodybuilder. He's not going to be very tall, at 5'9" at the most. Yeah,
real stout. And he's going against a probably 6'7" offensive lineman.
Yeah, definitely NFL pro type offensive lineman.
Yeah, and so they're using combine prep rules, supposedly.
Yeah, which is a kicker here. Not to bash, it looks like it's a training company that has posted this video, and the literal form that this guy's using is embarrassing. Now, he's really strong.
Yeah.
But it is embarrassing.
And that's the football player.
Yeah.
I mean, and the bad thing about it is they are stressing that the rules are don't lift your hips off the bench.
Yeah. Must lock out every rep. His feet are kicking all over the place. It's pretty bad.
I don't think he did one correct rep.
Yeah. Not that he couldn't have, but he didn't.
Yeah, exactly. So he just jumped in the competition mode. This little short bodybuilder wasn't going to beat him.
Yeah.
Right? And I think he ended up getting about, with 315 pounds, 16, 17 reps.
Yeah. It was a solid number. I mean, especially with that wingspan. That's a hell of a number.
Absolutely, yeah. And so the little bodybuilder, well, he's not little, he's short. I myself am not 6'5", neither is Byrd. But he did it, 30 plus?
34, I think.
34 times, yeah. With good form.
Yeah, which is almost the exact number I did at the combine with 225.
Right.
So,
yeah, I've never approached that number. I bet you after doing some push-ups, I could do 135, 34 times. My best is 225 for 25, which has been pretty good, but that was a long time ago. Now, here is the issue with this video. It was the comment that the Facebook poster put underneath it. See, I told you guys that football players know nothing about strength.
Yeah, and unfortunately, that insult is your typical internet troll.
Right. Now, let me add a little background. Now, this guy, I know him personally. He's been in the fitness industry since the early 90s.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, and he's a competitive power lifter.
Okay.
Yeah, so that adds even a little more to it. And it was like one of those, before it was popular, football players don't know anything about strength, prove me wrong, kind of thing. And you could tell that everybody that was responding to it knew in their hearts that that was wrong, but they couldn't explain why.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that kind of brings us to the topic of what do you mean by strength?
Yeah. And the reality of what that guy was doing, hey, he's clickbaiting. He got a lot of people involved into some chatter. And the reality is one stationary movement is not going to determine a football player's strength level.
No. It's just an indicator. Really, you've been to a combine. I haven't. But I've trained people for combines and have attended them. I just think they're making sure that you've got enough strength to do the job.
Correct. I remember, while it's not football, I remember when Kevin Durant was coming out of college and he couldn't do 185 for a rep at the NBA combine.
Yeah.
And everybody was like, oh man, he's never going to be able to play in the NBA. How's that turned out?
Yeah. Colin Cowherd said he wasn't strong enough to get dressed in the locker room.
It's that type of statement, though. Now that you give me the background that this guy is a power lifter, and I use that term loosely because, all that really takes is getting on the platform. But the reality of it is that's what most casual gym goers think anyway. Every year when the NFL Combine comes by and your offensive linemen are doing in the 20s, 20 to 30 reps, they fail to take into account that football player is 6'5".
Right.
His wingspan is double yours. He's pressing at double that range of motion. Powerlifting is a sport that is used to, the better your range of motion, the better you're going to be. Hence why the arch in the bench press, the wide stance in a squat, why people pull sumo. The shorter the range of motion, the more effective. Football players aren't necessarily looking for the most effective avenue to move that bar. They're looking for the most effective way to be strong on the field.
Exactly. And, Byrd and I played football at the same college, and I came through before he did, and there was a guy that I played with that was 6'7", and I think he may have bench pressed his body weight before. But I promise you, if he got his boat paddle hands on you, he felt pretty strong.
Yeah, I can attest that I'm fairly confident that every person I ever lined up against, I was most likely stronger than between overall strength. Definitely could put up a bigger powerlifting total than.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean I was always physically dominant on the field. And that's what the difference between a athlete and a powerlifter or gym goer is.
Yeah. And I think that's one thing I've always thought, and this isn't a knock on powerlifting, but really it should be called strength lifting because it doesn't matter how fast you move the bar as long as you get it.
Correct. And, I'm in countless of these Facebook groups, and I've got where I don't even reply or post anymore. Unfortunately, you can hate it as much as you want to. A good bench press setup shortens the range of motion 3 or 4 inches, and in the sport of powerlifting, that's what you're looking for. Not necessarily the case in the world of athletes. Now, I'm not saying they shouldn't have an arch in their spine when they're bench pressing, because everybody should. Don't let that start that debate. That's a whole nother topic we can go down. But strength in athletics and strength in just powerlifting are not the same. They're just simply not.
Yeah, and I think the key word you used there was sport.
Yeah.
Football's a sport, so is powerlifting.
Yeah.
And bodybuilding is a sport.
Yeah, no doubt. Those are some of the toughest people I've ever met in my life. I could never do it.
Yeah, and I've got friends that are bodybuilders, and I told them, you need therapy.
You got to love some chicken and plain white rice, buddy.
No doubt about it. I mentioned my opinion on the name of powerlifting, and that's just because I'm a little bit obsessive about wording.
Yeah.
But power, not to say that powerlifters aren't powerful, because they are, but power literally means how fast you can move the most weight possible.
It's funny you bring this up. So my roommate in college was also the left tackle who played beside me. I was much stronger than him in every lift except the power clean. And he always hung the title and says, well, I'm more powerful than you.
Yeah. And the thing about it is, there are just so many different types of strength. There's functional strength, which if you're an athlete, you had better have that. We have actually a teammate in common that his yearly diet and training regimen were cigarettes and natural light. And you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And I remember one year he came into camp and I said, hey man, did you work out this summer? He goes, shit, you know I didn't. But literally, as a center, he was playing fullback. I'd be engaged with a defender, and I could hear him make the block on the linebacker.
Yeah, he was a different breed of human being, and that this throwed out a lot. But I've watched a guy throwing up in his stance and then tattoo the linebacker and just keep right on rolling.
Yeah, and I don't know if you know this story, but during camp, his freshman year, he showed up to. Now wait, let me give you a little background here. Our camps were different because the rules in the NCAA were different back then. I played in the mid to late 90s, and Byrd came along early 2000s, and we had 3-a-days when I was there.
Yep.
And Fayetteville, if you don't know, Fayetteville, North Carolina is a hot place. And this particular guy showed up to the morning practice from the bar. And, you knew it because you could smell it when he got on the field. So they had him play. We were in a scrimmage. They tried him out, quote, on an offensive position and a defensive position. And between each play, he'd pull off his helmet and throw up beer only and never asked for water and never came out.
You imagine if that guy ever took his training serious, how good he could have been?
There's no telling. No telling. But out of just sheer toughness, the old saying, if you're going to be stupid, you better be tough. And he was.
Yeah, he's probably one of the toughest guys I ever played with, for sure.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. Well, his high school team, there were 15 players.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
I did not know that.
Yeah, and so he literally didn't come off the field ever.
Makes sense now.
Yeah. So kind of back to the football player versus bodybuilder debate. Now, I'm not hating on bodybuilders as a group, but I remember there would always be guys that would walk on to the team that were jacked.
Yeah.
And the first year or two, I remember thinking, oh man, this guy's going to come in and take somebody's position. And if they ever stuck around long enough for the first day of hitting, which a lot of them didn't, I remember the first time I went against one of those guys, I was like, does he not understand we're trying hard here?
Yeah.
But he was. And he just hadn't built up the fast twitch muscle fibers. He didn't have the range of motion. And I think that's one thing that's key is range of motion.
Yeah. I would, I'm trying to think of an appropriate way to phrase this, but being around both these types of sports for a long time, I'm going to exclude CrossFitters out of this because they do a lot more of mobile type stuff and probably strongman to a degree. But anytime that your training consists of, kind of fixed plane range of motions, it's hard to be athletic. Like I definitely got less athletic as I transitioned from a football player to just a powerlifter. Now, I powerlifted while I was playing football. I mean, everybody bench press, squats, and deadlifts. You know what I mean? But I also still had a lot of mobility things and other things that I did. Well, when I stopped being an athlete and started working on just being a powerlifter, things changed. You have to understand that mobility, to a degree, is the enemy of a strength sport. I don't want to be able to put my ass on my heels in the squat because I don't want 1,000 pounds to take me through the floor. I want to be rigid as humanly possible and only get to the depth required on that day. And you see the internet blow up now, oh, that squat's high, that squat's high. I'm basing my lift that day on what those 3 judges are going to give me. Now, with athletes in football, now that's a big debate coming here, is, squat depth. You see it a lot in high school and even a lot of college athletes squatting higher than I would like to say. And, you start the argument, well, you don't play from down there, but your hamstrings do play from down there. And so that's why I tell everybody you must squat deeper. But that fixed range of motion and that strenuous, that bodybuilder, he's not going to be able to play a down of football. I mean, it's just not going to happen. But and that 6'5" offensive lineman's also not getting ready to get on a show with a Speedo on either. So
No, he's 300 pounds. I don't think anybody wants to see that.
No, I mean, there's people out there that want to see it.
OnlyFans?
Yeah. I've got a link in the bio, and I'm absolutely kidding. That might cost me my job.
Well, just like you said when you were talking about the depth, they don't play down there, but their hamstrings do.
Yeah.
Range of motion is important in the aspect you go far enough to activate the muscles you need.
Yeah.
And I've trained some powerlifters, as you know, and because of you, And some of them are so terrified of mobility. I'm like, don't worry, you're not close to being too mobile. You're weaker than you want to be right now because you're immobile.
Yeah, and you learn, and I've learned this from you specifically, is that when things like that happen, you learn that you're not firing and or working certain muscle groups, and therefore it will cause an issue later. I had a bad issue with shifting in my squat because of lack of a glute fire, you know what I mean? And that really, really hurt. It probably cost me 100 pounds on my squat, and that's a massive amount towards my total.
Absolutely, and your glutes are the biggest muscle, and it's amazing to me the way your glute wasn't working, that you were able to squat as much as you were. Well, it's amazing you squatted how much you were anyway, but given the fact that you're basically on one glute, that made it ridiculous. So I know that you get guys that are afraid of the mobility, but they don't realize that if you don't enough for the muscles on the backside to activate, you are, like you said, you may be taking 100 pounds off your potential or more.
Yeah, and when you're talking about strength sports, that's massive. And then when you can, it still correlates to athletic sports, meaning football, baseball, basketball, any rotational, anything of that nature. If you're not able to use everything in your body effectively, you're not going to be as effective as you could be.
Right, and it really, whenever I try to keep things simple. Now I'll use big words just to keep my language more succinct, so I don't have to say so much. But really, when it comes down to working with somebody in a position like that, it is simple. What do they have to do for the activity they're trying to perform? I trained a professional bull rider about 15 years ago. I've never ridden a bull. I think I'd probably break his back. And I never will ride a bull. That's a promise.
I've had a few rounds with a buffalo or two.
Yeah, but that's different. That's fighting. but literally, this guy was 140 pounds. And my job was not to teach him how to ride a bull.
Yep.
My job was to help him stay on the bull using the technique he had. So, biggest thing is, I would imagine you're going to get swayed around a lot. Probably ought to have a pretty strong core. You're holding on to that rope. You better have a pretty good grip.
Yeah.
So I look at the activity that they are already proficient in, and then I think about what muscles are involved. I used to, when I owned a gym, I had guys that would specialize in a sport they had played, for instance, and they would be training kids in that same sport, and they're working on those skills. And I had to tell them over and over again, listen, they get this at practice. They're not here to learn how to play their sport better. They're here to prepare their body to do it.
Yeah.
And, it's like with our football players. You use the same, but you also understand that mobility is important.
Yeah, and you're not going to be fast if you're not mobile.
Not possible.
That's the reality of it. And, going back to the original video there, technique and all of these things matter, and being taught the proper technique matters. There's reasons why guys specialize in being combine specialists and speed specialists, corrective movement specialists. Like, those things all come into play when talking about building an overall good athlete. And look, I've made a living as a powerlifting coach. I mean, I have. So I'm not knocking powerlifting coaches in the least bit. What I'm saying is, you have to know your wheelhouse and what you're trying to teach. And like you just said, knowing what the sport's going to detail and require and getting the person prepared for that. You don't see that from most coaches. You see what you just mentioned before. Teaching what you know and only what you know versus what to prepare that person better for.
Yeah, and I've worked in gyms in different parts of the country, and some of these guys that work there just drove me nuts. I've seen a number of different things. One guy was like, "Oh, it's almost 2:00," and he runs over to the printer and prints out a workout from Bodybuilding.com for his 60-year-old client.
Nice.
Yeah, real professional.
Yeah, I've wrote for him several times. It's not very good.
You didn't have any 60-year-olds in mind, did you?
No, not at all.
Neither did this guy.
I'm sure.
Yeah, and so I know one guy. I worked at a gym, and he was busy. He stayed busy. He literally had one workout, and he ran 12 people through it every day.
Good one the other day, and I really wish I had saved it now. It was a guy talking about, he said, I've got a way to maintain clients and keep bringing in new ones consistently for, years. And I asked, well, because I come up with new, inventive, crazy exercises that they think were pointless. Yeah. And I said, well, the consistency and getting better, and, he's like, yeah, that's not important when maintaining clients. And sadly, he's right. But if you want success, you really only need about 15 exercises and rotate them and do them right, and then long-term success happens.
That's right.
But the catchy shit you see on the internet with guys balancing on a ball, catching stuff, and one-handed, hey man, it looks good on the internet, but your 14-year-old kid who's getting ready to play high school sports, I mean, it's not necessary. Yeah. Which is sorry, it's not.
Yeah, and I've got a ton of stories like that. I know. See, I just got into the fitness industry in 2006, and that's when functional training was the new thing. Mm-hmm. And everybody was on a ball. If you didn't use a stability ball, you weren't a good trainer. Yep. And I remember I was working at one gym, and this guy was doing something on a ball, standing on it. And I said, what are you doing? This is functional. I said, what function are you performing? And balance. And I moved on from there. And there was a guy that I trained at that same gym, and he had been a boxer in the past, and he was in his 50s at the time. He goes, you know what I like about you? I said, what's that? He goes, you don't make me do tricks. And that's what he called everything they were doing was tricks. Mm. And, can you use some of that stuff? Can you use some of those modalities? Sure you can. But it's not about doing the most complicated, impressive looking thing. It's about doing what's the most effective.
Yeah, it looks good on the internet.
Yeah.
That's great for clicks.
Yeah.
It's great for pulling in, people who think the new fad and that's what they need to be doing. But the reality of it is a very small percentage needs to be working on those things. Yeah,
high school football coach was a great lifting coach. I still use things that I learned a long time ago just because it's sound. Yep. And the big thing is if you're working with a coach that does not assess you ahead of time, then you're wasting your money.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
If they just give you a program and send you on your way, then you're following that same guy around that does the same workout with everybody.
Yep. I only coach a handful of clients online these days just because it's become such a fad that I kind of got away from it because, again, everybody's looking for the new fancy thing. I had a high school kid out of Wisconsin reach out to me a few weeks ago. Didn't have much money, and I couldn't just find it in my heart to charge a high school kid who wants to be a power lifter anyway. Mm-hmm. So, I did it for free on the condition that he bought certain books. So you must buy and read these books so that eventually you can learn to train yourself and know what to look for. And, if your trainer's job is to just keep you on the hook with new fancy things, he's just stealing money from you guys.
Absolutely.
His job should be to teach you to prepare yourself to long-term being able to help yourself. Now, don't get me wrong. Some of the best powerlifters in the world all have coaches. Yeah. I mean, because sometimes the outside eye makes a big difference. But they know what they were doing if you weren't there either.
Sure. And that's the thing is the motivational aspect of things. I mean, on a football field, people ask, why are you always yelling? Because we're asking kids to do a hard thing at a really high level of exertion.
And think quickly on the fly while doing it. Like it ain't, it's not like they're sitting in a classroom and, you have 30 minutes to figure out the answer. You have seconds, and sometimes seconds is too long.
That's it. And I know our old college coach, I quote him a lot because he's the best boss I ever had and best coach. But his rule was, and then you tell him the second time if you don't get it, and the third time you get emotional because that means he's not focusing.
It's a great way to look at that, for sure.
Yeah. And in terms of keeping clients on the hook, it's a temptation to do that if you're training people full time. But the way I do it is if they're continuously getting results, then they'll stay.
Correct. The results will always speak for themselves. I never had a problem getting clients and never really had to solicit because the people I was coaching were producing.
Yeah.
And when they're showing up and doing well, and then the word of mouth makes things so much easier. And then you get to be a little bit more selective on what you do. As far as you guys that are training people, in your own private gyms, it's a little different. But at the same time, at a local level, if the people you are training are producing, same thing will take place.
That's it. And I have to be able to sleep at night.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it has happened where, I've got clients currently that a couple of them I've been trained for 7 years.
Yeah.
And I can legitimately tell you this, if I thought they'd be better off without me, I would tell them so. Have done so in the past.
Yeah, I just parted ways a few months ago with a bench press client that I had been with for 5 years. He always paid 6 months in advance, always, great client. It was bad business for me to ask him to move on. But we had become stagnant as trainer and coach. And I was like, well, maybe I've reached the peak of what I could teach him. He was bench pressing close to 900 pounds, okay? And so I'm like, maybe he needs to work with someone else. And, of course, he actually argued against it for a bit. And I said, look, I just want you to try to work with some of these other people and maybe see if I'm missing something, because maybe I'm getting blinded by the forest, I think we got a little bit of an injury bug since then, so maybe it was a bad decision on my part to send him somewhere else. But sometimes that happens.
Yeah, and all you can do is try to give them guidelines for somebody to look for. I think it's the right thing if you're really looking out for the best interests of your client, to tell them to move on if you feel like it's time to move on, because their next coach may not necessarily be better than you, but they may be different enough to make it happen. So I know, I go to conferences still occasionally, and there's nothing new under the sun.
Oh, absolutely.
And just like if you go to a football clinic. But you might hear somebody say something in a different way that makes it click differently for you.
Yeah. Coaching cues are a big part of things that I've noticed over the years, that we're all trying to say the same thing in general, but some people have a better way of phrasing it, and then it clicks for clients. It clicks for you as a coach. I steal all the time. I steal all those types of things, and I typically give credit. I learned most of what I've learned about how to train a lifter came from Brian Carroll. I don't hesitate to say that. Most of what I learned about back rehab came from Brian and Dr. McGill, and it's just a matter of you learning to read it and apply it.
Yeah, experience matters. Over a period of time, you see stuff. There was a guy that I worked with at a martial arts gym, and he was starting to feel like people were looking down on him because I had more educational training. I said, you've been doing this since the early 80s. If there's anybody I'm going to ask a question of, it's going to be you.
Yeah, we probably should have started with that. The interesting part of this podcast is your educational background dwarfs mine. I look pretty silly on paper in comparison. Most of my education came from under a squat bar. I kind of had to learn it all the hard way, between a blowed off pec, ACL, MCL, both meniscus, multiple torn hamstrings. I had to learn it the hard way, and you put Humpty Dumpty back together again and made me functional, which is a huge part of what I struggled with in knowing.
Yeah. What's a funny aside to that is when he tore his pec, he sent me a message on Facebook and said, do you know how to fix a torn pec? And I said, well, how bad is it torn? Well, the muscle itself is fine. It's torn off the bone. I said, well, then I'd recommend you talk to a surgeon.
I did.
Yeah.
Still doesn't work worth a shit.
Yeah. Probably better than it would have, though, I guess.
Yeah.
Back to video, to make such a definitive statement like football players don't know anything about strength, that guy definitely blew him away in the bench press.
No.
Now, put him in a set of pads or hook him up to a sled.
Yeah.
Different story altogether.
Or just a loaded push sled.
Just a loaded push sled.
You know what I mean? It's similar movement. Your bench press, a punching range of motion into a pad and then driving it, it's not going to be close.
That's it. And that guy was really strong, but if you has been lifting for any amount of time, when is the amount that you go up the most when you first start? I remember when I first started bench pressing, I was 13 years old, and I couldn't bench 135. And then within a month, I did 150. And the only reason is I got better at bench press.
Oh, yeah.
I was already strong enough to do it.
I tell kids this all the time. Well, when you're coaching high school age kids, they get a little frustrated, especially early on, and embarrassed when the older kids are much stronger than them. And I tell them all the time, I said, look, I was 260 pounds in the 9th grade, fat. I benched 155 pounds. That was my first bench max. That was on November 7th, 1997. I know it's weird, and I know this. Before we left for Christmas break, I had benched 200 pounds. Mm-hmm. So in a month, I didn't put 45 pounds on my bench press. I learned how to bench press.
Yeah. Wouldn't it be nice if it stayed that way?
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, my progression at an early age was insane. I'd benched 300 pounds before we started football as a sophomore. So, in 6 months time, I put 150 pounds on my bench press. And then, nothing in strength sports is linear. Don't let anybody tell you that. So.
Exactly. If you look at that video, that bodybuilder was an excellent bench presser.
Yes, absolutely. Which is honestly a rarity for most bodybuilders.
Right. Well, yeah, because a lot of the guys don't care about range of motion.
Or bench press at all as far as bodybuilding goes. I mean, it's more dumbbell work and muscular size. That guy had probably been a competitive powerlifter at some point.
Right, because he was a thick-looking guy, too.
Yeah, he was probably 240 pounds at 5'7". So, he was definitely a professional level bodybuilder. And 315 pounds for 30-some reps, that probably equates to a mid-500 bench press without being a bench press specialist, which is, a raw bench press. That's impressive. There's, that's a small percentage of the world that can do that. So.
No doubt. And so, really, to kind of sum it up, strength can't be defined as one thing.
Correct. Especially not just a bench press.
Right. Especially not just a bench press. That's such a small part of your anatomy.
Yeah.
Any type of movement that you do, whether it's bench press, anything that's, I guess, weight bearing, that you're on your feet, is going to involve everything, or it better involve everything.
Yeah.
So, any final thoughts, Byrd?
Yeah, once you watch the video, know that you're not supposed to be humping the air, and your ass should not be 4 foot off the bench, and know those don't count.
Yeah, those are good coaching points, I think.
I'm not sure that the combine specialist that was developed, I did preparing him for that.
Everybody was excited for that YouTube video, I think. All right, so we've been on a little over half hour. We're going to wrap this one up, and we'll have another one out soon. Appreciate you listening.